In this lesson, we're going to look at equations that have parentheses in them. We've been looking at different types of equations in the series of lessons that this is a part of, and just different ways or different complicated systems of equations that, as we look at them, there's some different techniques involved in solving them. So in this case, we have a set of parentheses in the equation, and the way you solve an equation like this is to get rid of the parentheses. And so we want the parentheses to go away. And there's a couple of different ways to do it depending upon how the equation is arranged. But this general technique will work regardless of how it's arranged. If we think of the terms in this case, here we have a number term in front of the parentheses, which means it's this number 3 multiplied times each term inside the equation. So here's another number term. So this term, I'm going to actually put a box around it in the -2. And then we have another term here, a letter term, because it has a letter in it. I'm going to put a box around that one too, and it includes the -4. So the trick here sometimes is the negative signs belong to the numbers they're attached to. So this is a -2 and this is a -4x. Sometimes you would look at this and think, well, this is -2 minus 4x. Well, that's true. A minus, a subtraction, is really adding a negative. So keep the negative sign with the 4x. And then the last term here is a number term. And we're not really going to deal with the -66 at this point because it's on the other side of the equal sign all by itself, so we really don't have to deal with that. We just want to deal with where the parentheses are. So I have a number term out in front of parentheses and then 2 terms inside the parentheses, a number term and a letter term. And the idea in solving these is this 3 needs to be multiplied by each term inside the parentheses separately. So we actually have 3 times a -2 and 3 times a -4x. We're going to do that, and that's how you eliminate the parentheses. So I'm going to just kind of write this procedure out here. So what we're going to do is multiply whatever the term is in front of the parentheses by each term inside the parentheses. So you have to think of each term that's inside the parentheses as a separate term, and each of them multiplied by the 3. So I'm going to actually write that out, what that looks like. So it's 3 times a -2. I'm going to actually just use sets of parentheses here. So we have that multiplication, 3 times -2, which is -6. And that takes care of the first multiplication, and then 3 again times the -4x. And so it's 3 -4x's, which makes a total of -12x. 3 times 4 is 12, it's negative, and there's an x involved, and so that x stays with it. So what I've done now is multiplied the 3 times each term inside the parentheses, and now the parentheses are gone when I take each of these new terms and put them together. -6 minus 12x equals -66. And so now what we have is, without the parentheses, we have basically what we would call a 2-step equation to solve. And we go back to some of our previous lessons, and we know that with a 2-step you add the opposite number term to both sides first. And this becomes a 0 by the additive inverse property. And we have a -12x that comes down. And again, that make sure that negative stays attached to the 12. And then that equals -66 plus 6 would be -60. And then our last step is to divide both sides by the multiplier of x. And so divided by 12 gives me x equals -60 divided by -12 is +5. And so they're eliminating the parentheses, and also coming up with a solution to the value of x. And so that's how you deal with equations with parentheses. Now, let's do another example, just to make sure we have this idea down. So the idea, again, is to multiply the term in front of the parentheses by each term inside the parentheses. So this one might be a little more confusing because we have a 4 times a 6 and a 4 times a negative 1x. Sometimes people don't understand that there's really a 1 in there, so I'm going to go ahead and put the 1 in just to help. And then we'll do that. So 4 times 6 is 24. That's the first pair multiplied together. And then 4 times negative 1x is 4 times negative 1, or negative 4x. And so there now are my new terms without the parentheses. 24 minus 4x equals 72. So again, term outside of the parentheses, in front of the parentheses, multiplied by each term inside the parentheses eliminates the parentheses. And now we solve this like we would a standard two-step equation by adding the opposite number term to both sides. Bring down the negative 4x, don't lose that negative sign, and 72. And then we take away the 48, or the 24, and we get 48. Get ahead of myself. And so now we have negative 4x equals 48, and then we can divide both sides by the multiplier of x. And then we get x equals negative 12. And there's our solution, eliminating the parentheses and solving this equation. Really is just a three-step equation. We could make it a lot more complicated if we added more things and with the parentheses, but for now, just the concept is to get rid of the parentheses. To get rid of the parentheses, one more example, we're going to multiply the term in front of the parentheses times each term inside the parentheses. So the term out in front times each term inside. And again, I'm going to put boxes around them so we can identify the different terms. So it's the 7 times the negative 4x and the 7 times the negative 9. So I'm going to write that out. 7 times negative 4x is our first multiplication through, which is 7 times negative 4, or negative 28x. There's an x in this one, so the x stays. And then the second one is 7 times negative 9. So 7 times 9 is negative 63. Negative times a positive. And so now our new equation without the parentheses, using the new terms we created, negative 28x, and then a negative 63, or minus 63, equals negative 231. So now I just brought this back into the equation with my new terms. And now we basically have a two-step equation, adding the opposite number term to both sides. Negative 28x equals negative 231 plus a positive 63, with the positive 63 makes a negative 168. You need a calculator to do that. Use the calculator to do that calculation. And then my last step is to divide both sides by the multiplier of x, which is negative 28. So if I divide both sides by negative 28, then I get x equals, this actually goes in 6 times. And because it's a negative divided by a negative, it's a positive 6. And there you have it. And that's how you take care of equations with parentheses. And what we've just done is actually something called, actually it has a name. I'm going to write it out here. It's called the distributive property, multiplication. And so what we're doing is distributing the 7 to each term inside the parentheses. So distributive property says multiply this term times each term inside the parentheses, and that eliminates the parentheses. So we've distributed the 7 to the other 2 terms inside the parentheses. In this case, we distributed the 4 to the 6 and to the negative 1x. In the original first problem, we distributed the 3 to the negative 2 and the negative 4x. Now there are other ways to do this in this kind of problem, but for now this is a good technique to learn. Many times you'll see parentheses in problems, and this is one of the ways to eliminate them.